Hello, this is David from Feeling Strong. Today we have an amazing and very exciting guest with us. On the line is Austin Current from Physique Development. He's the co-founder of Physique Development and also an author of an amazing book for training and nutrition called The Science of Strength Training, which you can find on Amazon, and we'll put a link at the description of the video. Really amazing read for you guys who wanted to upgrade your knowledge on fitness and training. Austin started doing and fell into the fitness industry in 2014. He earned an IBBF Pro card, and afterwards he started coaching people who want to do prep and also lifestyle coaching. As I said, he's an author of an amazing book, and also he's been featured on publications like Men's Health, Bodybuilding.com, T-Nation, BarBend, and in general they have with two other coaches, main coaches of the Physique Development podcast and website, amazing content throughout fitness and lifestyle and nutrition. So basically it's worth checking it out. So Austin, again, thank you for your time and being on a podcast with us. Today we'll be discussing a very important topic for everyone that's in lifting. That's the principle of exercise selection for hypertrophy. So first and foremost, please let me know if I missed anything on your introduction before we start.
No, you did a great job. People always make me sound a lot cooler and smarter than I think I am. But, yeah.
Okay,
no, you didn't miss anything.
Great, that's great. Okay, and thanks again for your time today. So I think that we can start the ball rolling. First off, given that there's a lot of content and information regarding how to choose an exercise, which exercise better than other, so we put a slight agenda here that we'll be following. But again, we can deviate from that and see how the things will go. But first, let's define if we have a specific principle when it comes to exercise selection, what we should focus on regarding the exercise we choose in our training program.
Yeah, I think as far as choosing an appropriate exercise for the goal, I like that way of saying it a lot, where we're essentially trying to ensure that it lines up with the desired muscle tissue that we're trying to train, that the line of resistance, where the resistance is coming from, so whether that's free weights like dumbbells or barbells, or a cable or a machine or anything like that, we want to be sure that that line of resistance makes sense, right? And the resistance profile, where that rep is hardest or toughest throughout the range of motion, complements the goal, right? So I think that's a good sort of starting principle of choosing the appropriate exercise, right? So I'll repeat that just really quick. Ensure that it lines up with the desired muscle tissue, so that resistance makes sense. It lines up with the tissue you're trying to train. And then the resistance profile, essentially where that exercise is most challenging throughout the range of motion, make sure that starts to complements the goal that you're trying to accomplish. So within, training for muscle growth and hypertrophy, I think it's important that there's a wide range of resistance profiles that you train within, and you challenge the muscle throughout a large range of motion, as a lot of people have probably read about. But there's obviously different variants within that, and there's different ways you can prioritize that. But I'll let you kind of guide that and see where we want to go today.
Okay, and based on the variety of exercises, let's say we use the quads as an example. In your opinion, can we build impressive quads using only the leg press or hack squat, or we should use an accessory lift like the leg extension, since one is using the lengthened position, the other the shorter position of the muscle? Would that make a difference long term, or like using only single type of lift with the needed amount of sets? Let's say we put in we require 10 sets per quads. We use only one exercise versus two exercises, 5 sets each. Would that make a difference in your opinion?
Yes. Yeah. So there's two ways we can sort of go attack this question. And I think first and foremost, I think it's important to understand form and function, and understand creating a healthy functional joint, right? So understanding kind of what muscles cross each joint, And again, like on behalf of like if you're a coach or a trainer, this is, important stuff. And if you're not, and you're just a person who likes to train and lift, I think it's still important to understand these lines of thought, these sort of caveats and nuances that live within this selection of exercises. So, to kind of go to your question here, I think it is important to add a variety of exercises. So I'll kind of start with that, but to kind of go backward, there's always the way of answering a question of like, well, theoretically, if you only had one exercise to do, and if the only leg exercise you had was a back squat or a hack squat or a leg press, your quads, if you did enough volume, like your quads definitely would grow, right? They would definitely get bigger, barring nutrition and recovery and all the other parameters are there. But is it going to grow as optimally, quote unquote, as it could have? Is that tissue going to grow more evenly and symmetrical across the entire, muscle itself?
Okay.
So you got to think too, the sort of regional hypertrophy where certain tissues throughout a range of motion get challenged more than others, right? So if you have the quads, for example, there's 4 different divisions of the quad, and it's a really long muscle, right? It spans from your knee all the way up, crosses your hip. And so that's a very long, right? Our biceps are kind of a short muscle if you think about it. I mean,
Yep.
long relative, but like they're shorter, where we kind of like, you kind of flex your bicep and you're like, all right, it kind of goes from there to there. That's not that challenging. As long as you're doing curls, you're probably going to grow that muscle. But with your quads, for example, to use your example, it is a long, big muscle with a lot of different divisions, that in a lot of different ways that those divisions interact with the tension and help move load across, a given range of motion.
Okay.
And so with that, throughout an exercise, throughout a range of motion, or as you're going, let's say down in a squat or a hack squat or something like that, your tissues are sort of passing off based off of their ability to create tension and manage the load. They're managing that load the best they can with each division, and throughout that range of motion, they sort of pass off responsibility as you go. Let's say down into the rep, the load will shift to different divisions who have better that these divisions have better leverage to manage that load. And then that isn't to say any one, division of the quad or anything is isolated. It's just they're all working together, but on different roles and managing the tension in different severities or amounts throughout that entire rep, right? So all that to say essentially where, at the bottom of a squat, there's more load on certain tissues or divisions, right, over others. And so, and then as you're going up in the squat, so the most tension in a squat is at the bottom of the range, right? It's when you're kind of at the bottom or in the hole, quote unquote, of that squat. When you go down, right, when your butt's closest to the floor,
Yep.
That's where the tension's greatest, and so that's where the load is putting the most amount of tension on your muscles, on your quads. And so, as you start to stand up, you start to close that gap where there's less and less and less tension as you go up, right? And as you stand up and your joints are sort of stacked on top of each other, right? You can sort of stand there with a lot of weight and there's not much, there's really no tension going through your quads out,
Yeah.
And so not enough to grow a muscle, right? So it's important to say that where because of the way that these movements challenge these muscles differently, it does help to have a variety, right? And the leg extension, for example, is one where it's almost impossible, as far as I'm, aware, to replace a movement like a leg extension to some degree, right? Because of a certain division of the quad called the rectus femoris that crosses the hip joint, right? And you have to, it fully shortens and contracts when there is that knee extension and that hip flexion, right? And it can be challenged, obviously, within hip extension and stuff like that too. But when you're in that position, like when you're seated in a leg press or a leg extension, sorry, when you're seated in a leg extension and you bring that knee up, right, and you essentially extend that knee and fully sort of contract that quad, that's one of the only positions where you can really, really, really challenge that rectus femoris within a, let's say, an easy to execute movement, an easy to perform movement within the gym. And so that's going to create, you know, strength in different positions, at different muscle lengths, around different joints, right? So now instead of most that tension, like say at the bottom of the squat going through the knee joint, now we're taking that and sort of spanning load across a knee joint, your hip joint, and allowing all those tissues that manage a lot of other functions get stronger and get a little bit bigger and things like that to be able to manage more load in the future, right? And you'll notice the stronger your, you know, rec fem is, your rectus femoris is, the more or better your hips are going to function, they're going to feel, and the more load you'll really be able to potentially even Romanian deadlift, back squat, any of those movements, because they rely, your hip joint, you know, your hip in general is a big joint, right? And it relies on all those muscles that cross the joint, that cross the hip to manage load and to help stabilize your pelvis and do all of these things, right? So it's, you sort of have to, yes, there's, if you look at it in a vacuum, we're sort of very one-sided or narrow, under a narrow lens. You could quote unquote get away with just doing one exercise, right? That would work, you know, but it's how would it work and for how long would it work and for how long could you stay healthy without doing any other movements, right? And those are sort of the questions you have to start to answer, and why exercise variety does become important, and understanding exercise selection for a goal that you have is increasingly important if you do have goals of getting bigger and stronger and staying healthy along the way.
Yeah, I think that that answer was simply amazing from like a hypertrophy perspective. And in a nutshell, we can say that if one wants to improve specific muscle group and they need to choose specific exercises, the best thing to do is to understand the anatomy of the muscle group in question, since that will allow them to having variety of exercises to specifically bias a specific part of that muscle group. Since you mentioned with your example, the biceps is pretty much you lift your arm up and you eventually grow it, but with the lats and quads, let's say, it's not that easy to use only one exercise, since the grip, the angle of your arm and humerus will basically by a specific part of the muscle. It's not that it's not working entirely, like it's the entire back, it's and the entire, let's say, lat is working within pull down, but not in the most optimal way, which you'll benefit with some. So yeah, something you guys can think of when you're choosing your exercises is basically variety, since as we see with the examples we provided, different sections of the muscles are biased, and is important for long-term like success. Yeah. So in general, we touch base on that topic regarding the squat and the leg extension, using an example with a main lift and isolation work. So when we speak about free weights, cables, machine, and generally the structure of our training program from the perspective of choosing the exercises, it's hard to say what percentage exactly, but should we focus more on main exercises, let's say 60 to 70% of the compound lifts, and the other to leave for accessory work and isolation, or in your opinion, we can, let's say, build muscle only use isolation machines?
Yeah, and as usual, I'm going to try to make this simple and also give you context around why it can be more difficult than just a simple answer. So most simply put, I think it comes down to how much time do you have to be in the gym,
Okay.
right? So it's how can we maximize our return on investment in the gym? And so depending on, if you have 3 days a week, only about 45 minutes to 60 minutes to be in the gym, then you're going to get more bang for your buck, quote unquote, on more compound exercises that train more muscle tissue each rep over that given time you have to be in the gym, right? So a squat is going to train inherently more muscle groups and challenge your body more than a leg extension will, right? So there's that component where, okay, if I only have time for one leg exercise today, then probably the back squat is a good go-to if you're healthy and you can back squat, and that's good. Or maybe another way to work around that would be like something like a hack squat, or maybe a leg press, or something of the sort. Something that trains a lot of muscle tissue with each rep.
Okay.
So if you don't have much time, that's a good approach. Now, when it starts to get more detailed and specific is when you have a lot of time. And this is a very important goal to you, and you dedicate, you'll say 5 days a week for 60 to 75, 90 minutes 5 times a week to this goal. Then we start to open up our options a little bit. We start to open up what we are able to do and the decisions we're able to make. And so I think that, again, the exercise sort of goes back to the first point, and we'll use that sort of as a home base. Choosing appropriate exercises for the goal that you have, right? So if you want to, there's not any exercises, in my opinion, that are absolutely crucial to building muscle, like by themselves. I think a well thought out group of exercises can be great for building muscle, but there's not one exercise that has to be on any of those lists, if that makes sense. So for example, is it required to back squat to grow muscle in your lower body? And the answer is no. You don't have to you don't have to do that. It is a way, and it can be a good, efficient, and effective method, but it doesn't have to be within your program to build muscle, right? There's plenty of people. I've gone long stretches of time without back squatting, and still grew muscle and did all the things, right? And so it's not a requirement, but it's, the exercise is a good one, but it's not required, right? And so it comes down to choosing the appropriate exercises for the goal. It comes down to which exercises can you perform well and stay healthy and create a lot of tension and drive deep into, muscular fatigue, and you can progressively overload over time, right? So these are exercises that we want to start to choose, right? So if you have an exercise that you just hate, well, that probably shouldn't be in there, right? And so there's got to be some exercises that you like to perform that also makes sense for the goal, right? And that kind of goes back to the original home base that we set, was ensuring that the exercises we're choosing line up appropriately with the muscle tissues we're trying to train, right? We're making sure that load and that tension and that weight is actually being lifted, and that load is going through the muscles we're trying to train, right? So if we're trying to grow our chest, but we choose exercises that target the biceps, well, we're not going to do a very good job at growing the chest, are we? And so that's where that's very important, right? We have to choose the right exercises to begin with. We have to choose at least the right grouping of exercises, ones that, let's say, keep with our example, challenge the chest tissue. Okay. And then within those exercises, let's say that narrows us down to, this is just a hypothetical. Let's say that narrows us down to 10 exercises. Out of those 10 exercises that you're able to do that challenge your chest, which ones make sense for the goal? that put a good amount of load and tension on that muscle tissue, that feel good, that you like performing, that you can progressively overload, and that you can perform with good technique, and you can take deeper and deeper into muscular fatigue. Those are good exercises. And so some of those may be compound, some of those may be isolation or accessory, that we label those, or single joint movements rather than multi-joint movements. So training multiple joints is more like a compound versus a single joint, which is more of what's normally labeled as accessory or of the like. So that's sort of my way of thinking that around that question of, should we choose more compound or more isolation? It first starts with how much time you have.
Okay.
And then if you're short on time, I think you have to make an executive decision to what's the best return on my investment here. So if you only have 3 days a week for 45 minutes, you should probably choose a lot of exercises that are multiple joint, that are compound, that train a lot of muscle tissue with each rep, right? And you probably, if you're only training 3 days a week, you probably won't have a dedicated day for each specific muscle group. You'll probably be training a variety of muscle groups in a given day. It may be all of them to some degree, right? Some sort of full body workout for 3 days a week. But if you have 5 or 6 days in the week to train, well, then we can spread out that training volume. We can spread out the intensity. We can spread out our need for recovery. We can spread out all of the factors that come with that. And then we have the abundance of time. So that opens up a lot more options. So does that answer help, or do you want to go a little bit specific? Or?
I think it's amazing. Like, it's great from the perspective. I was thinking that the question was going to go from answer perspective, but you went in a totally different way, which is
I normally do
great.
that.
Yeah. That time thing. Yeah, usually people ignore that because they have 45 minutes and want to do like 15 exercises, which is kind of like ridiculous. And we just went back from one simple thing, which is very important that people always neglect, like the basics. And I want to train like 5 times a week, but I can train 3 days a week. So yeah, this answer.
There is the management of expectation, and there's the reality of your situation. And so I think a lot of people also make a mistake where they set up their training program based off their hopes and desires and wishes, instead of their reality, right? So they'd like to train 5 to 6 days a week, so they set their program up for that, but they only really have time for 3 days a week, and they only go 3 days a week consistently. So how about we actually just set up a program that matches what you actually do, because then you're going to be able to actually maximize that and actually progressively overload that, and to choose the appropriate exercises and appropriate training volumes and frequency in which you're training those muscle groups, and all of those factors that we need to sort of organize our thoughts around when we're designing a program for ourselves or for clients or anything like that.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the 2 last questions in regards to keeping the people more interested for the last one, since I just wanted to check first with you, what's your opinion on and how you advise people to know if an exercise is stimulating muscle growth? What would be the signs? How maybe they can track progress? You mentioned progressive overload. So can you please provide more insights on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the research on all of this is, I'll kind of approach it from a very, again, fundamental sort of first principle standpoint of being able to rationally think through it. But, obviously going deep into the weeds, there's a lot of things that are unanswered in this department, as far as I know. As far as tracking, like EMG research and what stimulates what and what biases what. And there are people who are doing good, entry-level research into these subjects that are pushing the industry forward. But right now there's nothing that's like concrete that is sort of tried and true and understood. And so the sort of fundamental way of thinking through it kind of goes back to that initial statement, right? Does the exercise line up? Does the tension go through the muscle you're trying to train? If yes, check that box. That's a good box to check. Then does the exercise then place a lot of tension on that muscle, right? Not just sensation, not just like a squeeze, like a pinching or a cramping or something like that, but does it place real tension through the muscle? So as you're performing that, and I think a good way to gauge that is as you're performing the exercise and you're going through your reps and you get closer and closer to fatigue or failure, which muscle or group of muscles fails when that happens? Is it the muscle you were trying to train? If yes, then you're on the right track. If no, then you may need to rethink how you set yourself up, maybe the exercise that you chose, or how you performed that exercise, right? And so there's sort of a checks and balances equation you have to sort of think through of if this, then that, right? So if I'm getting tension through that muscle, then it should fatigue. It should be the thing that fatigues as I get through my reps, as I get towards the end of my sets, towards the end of my workout, right? Those you want to be sure that those are the muscles you're targeting, but those are the muscles that are actually fatiguing. And those are the reason you're failing a certain exercise, right? So if the goal is to, let's say, train our lats or something, we don't want, our other muscle groups to either be a limiting factor, or we don't want, as we're reaching failure, we don't want other muscles other than our lats to be reaching failure before our lats do, because that means that the most amount of tension, again, this isn't as black and white as this, but it's sort of an example where if that's the case, where other muscles that we're not trying to train or bias as much in that movement are failing first, then we have to sort of ask ourselves, okay, is this the best exercise to place tension on this muscle group that I'm trying to train? And it could just be that you need to fix some setup things, like getting set up for the exercise. It may be that your technique needs to be altered a little bit, improved. Your ability to have a good mind-muscle connection, your ability to engage that muscle, right? There's a lot of factors that go into this. But there's also a lot of things that if you set yourself up correctly, which is a lot of where our YouTube content comes from, is educating people on the importance of not only understanding kind of the basic anatomy of what we're trying to train and where those muscle groups are and kind of what their function is, but being able to set yourself up correctly in the first place. Because I always say it in the beginning of my videos, if you're not setting yourself up correctly, you're going to be fighting yourself the entire set, right? You're going to be trying to find the tension, right? So if you set yourself up correctly, your body's very smart, your brain is very smart, your nervous system is very smart, things that regulate where tension is going, things that regulate what joints are moving, all of those things. Your brain's already doing that at hyper speed, faster than you can ever think about it. And so we have to be sure, and the nervous, it's always learning, right? Your brain's always learning. It's learning either good movement patterns or bad movement patterns, ones that we want to reinforce, ones we may want to get rid of, right? So it's important. That's why I like kind of a no sets off mentality, as far as don't just go through, don't make it sloppy. If it's gonna be a sloppy set, if it's not going to be a good set with good technique and good form, especially in the early stages of your lifting career, if you're trying to improve a lot of these things, then just wait until your next session to do that set. So if you did three really good sets, you feel good about that, and if you did a fourth, it was not going to be very good, and it was going to reinforce you're going to have bad technique, or you couldn't maintain the tension, or you couldn't do a lot of different things that you should be doing to to sort of reinforce that those good movement patterns, then maybe just take that set and do it in your next session, right? Instead of piling on bad sets or less than optimal sets or whatever. And not that every set has to be perfect. I don't want to make it seem like that. And that your form can never break, and you know that if you're 80, 85, 90% there, it's not worth it, right? It has to be 100. That's not true. But what is true is sort of those foundational principles of understanding that we need to have, we need to choose a good exercise, obviously, that does place tension on that desired muscle group. And we need to be sure that we're setting ourselves up for success, right? We need to be sure we're setting ourselves up for this exercise in a way where it can place tension on that muscle group, and that we can perform it with good technique, and we're not fighting ourselves the entire set to even maintain or create tension in the first place. And then again, as you sort of alluded to, and as we alluded to earlier, does that exercise apply, or are you able to apply progressive overload to that movement or movements that you chose, right? Are you able to, and progressive overload is a wide term that we can sort of get into very briefly, or more specific if you want to, but very quickly, it's, a lot of times it's correlated with adding load to the bar or adding weight to an exercise, which is true, but it's also improving your ability to create tension in a movement, your ability to improve your technique in that movement, your ability to maybe manage your repetition tempo a little bit differently, maybe bias a certain part of the rep over another, your ability to maintain tension as fatigue builds, right? So if you can, let's say in a set of 10 or a set of 8, let's say, you normally you have good amount of tension up until rep 4 and 5, and your muscles start to get tired, and that's when your form breaks, right? You sort of, let's say you start doing cheat reps or something like that. Progressive overload still, in its truest form, is still taking that, what normally you break in 4 to 5 reps on a set to 8 to 10. Now you can do 7 to 8 reps before breaking with the same load. That's progressive overload too. That's still progressive overload, right? So you're still doing that part of it. And so all those are really important factors when it comes down to it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Austin. And I believe that the last question will be the most interesting one from perspective like you describing what will be the best exercises for hypertrophy in your opinion. I think if you can do only one exercise per muscle group, what will be like the list you would choose? Let's say you have only 45 minutes per session, for example, and what you choose. Like, I believe for the back you can list 3 since they're different divisions. Mm-hmm. But or maybe more, I don't know. But the exercise you will like suggest for people using.
I think what I would do, and so I'm going to break it down and sort of, I think it's important to cover your bases.
Okay.
Right. So, and also it's important that, let's say, well, do you want me to break it down like that, or do you want me to break it down to your true question? Only choose one.
Okay, you can break it down as you see fit. I don't mind at all. I just want to.
Yeah. Okay. So, as far as I think I think choosing 2.
Okay.
At least for like the legs.
Okay.
Can be a good helper in this question, because there are, like for the quads, like we talked about earlier, right? So let's say you're doing I think a really good leg movement that's worth your time, that's very effective and efficient of getting a lot of work done in a short amount of time, is something like a heel elevated trap bar deadlift,
Okay.
like a hex bar deadlift.
Okay.
I think that's a really good. So you're challenging your quads, you're challenging your glutes, you're challenging your entire upper body, your arms, your back, your core, right? You're challenging muscles of your lower leg, on the front of your leg, the calf, the tibialis anterior. You're challenging a lot of muscle groups
Okay.
in that movement, right? And so that's a really good bang for your buck exercise, where really, if I only could choose to do one exercise the rest of my life, it would probably be that one, because I'm getting a lot of expenditure. I'm training a lot of muscle tissue. I'm stimulating a lot of muscle tissue with each rep. And, you can train your cardiovascular system with that movement. If you did a lot of reps of it, or you can train your nervous system really well with it by doing low reps and getting stronger. You can build muscle with it, with a good mix of both of those. And so I think that's a really good, if I could only choose one exercise, that would be a great one.
That's a surprise, to be honest. I thought that you were going to say a hack squat, but yeah, I'm going to try that in my next lower body session for sure.
Yeah, and a hack squat. So a hack squat could be a good one as well. And if it was just limited to the lower body, I do think, and I wasn't taking the upper body into consideration, I do think the hack squat is a great all-around movement, or something like a pendulum squat, or which is kind of adjacent or similar to a hack squat, a little different. And so that one's, let's say for the quads, you could do, like a heel elevated trap bar deadlift or hex bar deadlift. Those are the same thing, different name. Hack squat's great too, so you could use that interchangeably. And then, as our example earlier, I do think it's important for form and function to add in a leg extension.
Okay.
Do that, right? I can't. I think you're going to run into problems down the road if you're not sort of doing those core, very important exercises that you can't really train those muscle groups within those ranges of motion with any other exercise, really. You can't load it or challenge it that way. So, so the trap bar deadlifts, I think, is a great one. The leg extension, so that's more quad, and it kind of gets the glutes in there as well. So that kind of covers that. And then I'll just choose one for the hamstrings. I could choose two, but Romanian deadlift, I think, is sort of your best go-to for hamstring, and it also gets glutes in there as well. If I could add a second, it would be like a lying leg curl, because it's going to train that hamstring and its knee flexion component. So the hamstrings have those two roles as well, hip extension and knee flexion. And so it's good to choose exercises that hit the different functions of those muscles, right? So the RDL, the Romanian deadlift, takes care of the hip extension component, but the lying leg curl takes care of the knee flexion component of the muscle group's function. Because it has two functions.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Do you prefer the lying leg extension over the seated one?
So it's going to come down to also where the load is mainly biased. Also, you're able to train that muscle group more closely to its most shortened and contracted position, right? So, because your hip, if you go through it, if you're kind of sitting there, standing up, hip extension and knee flexion is required to sort of fully contract that hamstring. So at a seated leg curl, you're in hip flexion. Your hips are flexed up. And so although you're able to fully flex your knee, your hamstring is still sort of in its own, it's a mid-range position, because your hip isn't fully extended, right? Because that hamstring does cross that hip joint. So it does matter what that hip is doing. And so that's the reason why I would choose a lying leg curl over a seated, if I had to choose. I do think they both have their application. So those are the two for the hamstring. And then chest, we can go chest. I think some sort of if you only had access to dumbbells or something. I think like a flat to a slight incline, like neutral grip dumbbell press for your chest is a great, one exercise you could do and progress over time really well. If you had access to cables, you could interchange that exercise with more of a cable chest press of some kind, because that is going to span across a very large range of motion as well, as far as the load goes and that resistance. So I think those are interchangeable. I think that would be what I'd choose for chest. And then for back, you said I can have 3.
Yeah, I think that it's required to have 3 since
yeah,
only one you can tackle all divisions of the back.
Yeah, I think having some sort of, at least some sort of horizontal and vertical component to your selection. So some sort of horizontal row, some sort of horizontal seated row, I think would be great. I think neutral grip takes care of a lot, but I think even more of a semi-pronated grip, so more of like, if you're thinking about training your upper back or rear delts or things like that, a semi-pronated grip on that seated row would be good too. And then I think a pull down movement of some kind, that includes pull-ups. Pull-ups are a pull down movement. You're the load instead of the load coming from the attachment. So same general idea. And then I think the wild card. So if we chose the neutral grip or semi-pronated row, seated row, and then we had the pull up, pull down as one exercise that you could be interchangeable on, then I think some sort of upper back focused standing row or something, with like a longer rope or something like that trains your rhomboids and your upper back and that function of scapular retraction and stuff like that. I think that would be a good addition. What 3 did you have in mind?
Well, I was thinking to use a pull-up again with a pronated grip, to use a neutral grip chest supported dumbbell row, and maybe a lat prayer or chest supported unilateral pull down with a neutral grip. So to tackle.
Yeah, that'd be good too.
Yeah,
and so because you could either take the question, I think, because there are multiple divisions of the lats, right, that you need their own sort of angles to train, or certain exercises to train them. But you have to add in the upper back a little bit there too. You don't want to neglect that. So I think those are good 3 exercises though.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, no, I think those are good. And so arms, that was our last one, right?
And maybe
and then delts.
Delts.
Okay. So arms, bicep.
That might be the last one, a 3 set, like 1 for shoulder and 1 arm exercise, a giant set. 3 exercises, 1 arm.
Yeah, that would be kind of like the C1 through C3 in a workout, or D1. What if we're going, whatever it would be. It'd be the end of your workout. So you could choose. I like the cable curl, either facing away or facing in. I think that does a lot. It's good bang for your buck. So a cable curl for your biceps and a cross cable tricep extension, I think, is a good.
Okay.
So you could just turn around and adjust the cables very easily.
Again,
for your triceps.
Example, saving some time. That's a great one.
Yeah, so I'm big into saving time and being efficient with your workout. And so I try to pair a lot of things together and hit a lot all, very close together, especially with great. Like
now everyone is playing busy, so your examples will be great. Like everyone applies them, saving time, and I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to save as much time as you can, for sure. Get on with your day, get in there, get out. And then, so that's bicep and tricep. And then I think you could just do a simple dumbbell lateral raise or something for the delts. That said, you could also do a cable lateral raise. If you're already at the cable station, you could just adjust the cables one more time and do that.
For the cables, does it mind if we'll be using the pulley on the bottom or like on the middle? Or maybe we can do a last drops, like a drop set on the last one. Let's say if we have the pulley on the low end, is it a good idea on the last set to lower the load and put it like in the middle and start like from mid height? Is that a good option in your opinion?
Yeah, you definitely could do that for sure. You could do that, or you could start. Yeah, you'd start at the bottom, sort of tire out or fatigue that range of motion, and then you could lift up. You could lower the load, lift it up more to wrist height or something, and finish with that. Because because that by moving that cable up, you're going to start to bias more of the lengthened range.
Okay.
Which usually has, if I'm not mistaken, and which usually has a little bit more strength.
Okay.
Relative to the shortened range. The mid range is always going to be the strongest.
Okay.
Really with most things. But yeah, you could do that. So okay. I think with the cable examples, you can really, why I like the cables is because you can, it's a good, even, consistent resistance as far as that goes. You can very easily know where that resistance is coming from because the line of resistance is literally the cable. So if the cable's going through a certain, in a certain direction or lining up with certain muscle groups, you understand that, well, that's where the resistance is coming from, okay. Literally where that cable is. So you can very easily very transparently see where that resistance is coming from and in what angle, all of those things. So I think cable exercises are great if you have access to a dual cable or a functional trainer or anything like that, because you're able to very easily manipulate where that resistance is coming from. You can even manipulate, maybe where an exercise is most challenging as you get more advanced. But also just because cable exercises, most often, you're able to set yourself up where more of that load is going through, more of that tension is going through, or resistance is going through the desired muscle group rather than the connective tissue, the passive tissues like your joints. Because usually with a lot of free weight exercises, they do place tension on the muscles you're trying to train, but a lot of time there's more overlap with more tension going through the connective tissues rather than the muscle. And that isn't to say it's, that black and white, but it is one of those things where you can manipulate it more and individualize it more with the cable most often than you can just with free weights, because free weights only work off gravity, right? And gravity only goes down on this rock that we live on. So I think that's an important thing to understand.
True.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, guys. Not only Austin answered all of my questions regarding the exercise selection of hypertrophy, we also picked his brain about the secrets of his exercises he would choose. So not only you have that, but the practical application. So there is no excuse for you to grow now. Like use that in
no
practice.
excuses at all.
So I think that that was an amazing conversation, Austin. Like really great examples and practical things to apply in training. So I think that our followers will be very happy to follow along that conversation and to apply that in their training. I do know that they will definitely have results, being more patient and apply that in practice. So I want to thank you for being with us on the podcast, for taking the time, and for showing us that great the knowledge and everything.
Thanks so much for having me.
Anytime.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.